On the 20th of April 2016, at the age of just 62, the wonderful, brilliant comedian, actor, musician, writer, director Victoria Wood passed away, tragically young. 10 years on, a new documentary film is heading into cinemas and then onto television to tell her story. Let's dig into Becoming Victoria Wood. Now, this is a film that's been put together. It's in part by the TV channel. I think you pronounce it You and Gold now. It's UK TV. It's going into cinemas in the UK on the 9th of January 2026. It's a 90-minute documentary. And the intriguing thing about this is, I mean, Victoria Wood's story hasn't really been fully told. There've been a couple of documentaries and I think one or two books. But what this film has done is gone into a lot of the stuff that we on our side of the fence haven't seen before. So it's found her scrapbooks. It's found her first recorded performance from 1973. Behind the scenes material. Some of it from some of her more successful productions, some of it from early stage work as well. There's interviews as well, and just like audio diaries too. And so it's a whole bunch of material really that we, as the public, rightly I guess, have not really had access to before. So the approach of this, the film is Becoming Victoria Wood. And it's directed by Catherine Abbott. And I mean, on the surface, it's your fairly standard life story documentary, but with a couple of different twists to it, really, and the digging into material that we haven't seen before. So, I mean, the blurb for it just simply reads, it's just like, Victoria Wood remains one of Britain's most cherished entertainers, entirely true, a comic genius whose work reshaped the landscape of British humour. I wanted to read that out because, you know, I lived through like the rise of Victoria Wood, seeing her become this incredible comedy force of nature, really. And I think it's hard sometimes if you've not gone through it, to realise just what an impact she made and just how she broke through in an environment where a female stand-up comedian as well, just was relatively unknown, certainly at the stature and the profile that she got. And the film comes back once or twice to an interview she did on Michael Parkinson's chat show, and she discusses fame and how she wanted to be famous growing up. And then the film also contrasts that by going back to the house where she grew up, where she was just known as Vicky, one of a couple of sisters, and the relationship with her father, and all these formative things that, you know, again, were relatively secret to us as we just watched her on television. I mean, I had the absolute pleasure of seeing Victoria Wood live in my lifetime. I went to one of her stand-up gigs that took place, in this case, in Blackpool. I remember her coming on stage and just admiring the brown colour scheme of the auditorium in which she was in. And then she just held the audience rapt. And it's just like, it was that combination which the film digs into of 1 minute being able to come out with this brilliant monologue, certainly talking about stuff that male comedians inevitably weren't talking about at the time. But some of her jokes were just like that. One of the reasons they were so fresh on television, so fresh in stand-up, is because women weren't being afforded, is because just the lack of high profile, and not for the want of trying, female comedian. And the film does dig into that, does go into a little bit of the context in which she managed to, well, a lot of the context really, in which she managed to build her career. So the title of it is important, because what you're not getting is the absolute definitive, complete 5-part Apple TV Martin Scorsese version of the Victoria Wood story. It's called Becoming Victoria Wood. And what the filmmakers, what Catherine Abbott's particularly zeroed in on, is what she pushed against to get to the level of fame that she enjoyed. And then, I mean, it'll be a disappointment to some, I guess, but at the point she hits that level of fame. Just like the foot comes off the gas a little bit with the film, because it's trying to tell the bit of the story that we don't know. And it doesn't go into her passing in any great detail or anything like that. This is about the rise of her and kind of like the ecosystem in which she was able to build this career. There are, as is like fairly the formula of a lot of this stuff, there are a bunch of talking heads, some of whom unexpected. So Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders appear on camera together, and I mean, they talk fairly openly about how Victoria Wood pretty much blazed a trail for them. Maxine Peake is really interesting. That she was her first acting role was in Victoria Wood's sitcom Dinner Ladies, and she's really candid talking about working with her, and you know, a little bit warts and all, not in a nasty way, but just like she gets across kind of the perfectionist edge of Victoria Wood and the control she wanted over her material. Joan Armour Trading, a friend of hers. Michael Ball, a really good friend of hers. So you get a lot of the archive stuff that's then interspersed with people who knew her, who were telling her story. So it's an affectionate telling of her story. It's not massively hard-edged or anything, but then it doesn't need to be, really. It sort of gets to a point where, I mean, the first time I really remember seeing Victoria Wood was the now legendary ITV series, An Audience with Victoria Wood special. And the film does mark that as a turning point in her career, that after that, I mean, it brought down a lot of barriers, that it went down so well that there was an awful lot more that she was able to do. But the gold really in this film, and I really found it an absorbing documentary. The gold is in that stuff that we've not seen before. So, I mean, it digs into things like newspapers just relentlessly discussing her weight, putting her to a level of scrutiny that, I mean, I know it's a cliche, but it bears saying that the male comedians who she was basically side by side with weren't getting that level of scrutiny. Even the most complimentary news headlines, and the film digs out lots of them. So old reviews, old headlines, stuff like that, just mention her weight or mention her figure, mention her size. And I mean, it does scratch at just what the impact of that was, that people couldn't take her as just this breathtakingly funny human being. They had to poke at the edges of her. They had to like find little ways to kind of tear her down. I found that really, really, really moving. And you know, really, I mean, it's really difficult to watch. God knows what it must have been like to live through, but really difficult. It also talks about a couple, I mean, degrees of confidence that she had, and the people who really helped set her on her way. Those little turning points as she built her career. At one point, she just thinks, as she's getting her first television break, she's through the door, and then the person who's got her through the door suddenly passes, and you kind of see her reflection of thoughts on that, and what kind. Again, the talking heads around talk about the impact of that on her. The partnership with the brilliant Julie Walters comes up inevitably a fair amount as well. There's some lovely stuff from Acorn Antiques. I mean, some of the archive is just a joy to watch, but to the film's credit, it doesn't actually lean on that for its weight. It shows it as illustrative for illustrative reasons, but the thrust of it isn't showing us a bevy of clips from Victoria Wood's career. When it picks them for good reason. I really commend it for that. I guess if there's a contentious bit to becoming Victoria Wood, it's how they choose to, for want of a better way of putting it, dramatise the material, certainly the diaries and the writings of her, that, again, we've not heard before. And so the way they've done it is they've cast Jessica Barden. You might know her from The End of the Effing World, Dune Prophecy. And she effectively plays Victoria Wood on screen. So we get a couple of sequences where we see her, not just her voice, but we see her as Victoria Wood reading some of the diary entries, reading some of the stuff that she's put down. And it gives, I mean, it certainly fleshes out the story that the documentary is trying to tell. But there's a tiny bit in me that I know some people are going to like this, some people can't. I can't quite make my mind up really. I think Jessica Barden does a really good job of it, but I always remember watching the Tina Turner biopic, What's Love Got to Do with It, where Angela Bassett in that is superb all the way through. And then at the end of that film, they show you a Tina Turner performance. And I just felt that sold Angela Bassett short there, because she's done this amazing performance. And then they put in the real thing at the end. And I always thought that's a slightly odd decision. So Jessica Barden, to a degree, is on a hiding to nothing here, because even though she's not performing, if you like, as Victoria Wood, she's a visual stand-in for her to fill in gaps of the story. I think the film just about gets away with it, actually. And I think the depth, as a way of presenting the depth of the material, I'm trying to consider how else can you do it? You're going to write it down. You're going to show screenshots of the diaries. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Perhaps they could have done voiceover over clips. And I just think of the collection of decisions they were faced with, I thought it was probably the best of the options. I don't think it's a perfect option, but about the best of the options. I mean, it's not in any way a film that's rewriting the way that documentaries are done, nor does it have to be, nor should it be. The way I look at this is a 90-minute feature documentary about, as all the blurb says, a beloved comedy icon that finds ways to scratch beneath the surface and tell us stuff that we didn't know before, to put more, I don't know, more of the human background into, and let's face it, Victoria Wood's comedy was incredibly human, but we see a lot more of the background of it. And I just found it a really, really absorbing, engaging piece of work. I do recommend it, whether you need to see it in a cinema or not. Well, I'd recommend seeing anything you can in a cinema, really. It's not, I don't think it's built for cinema, but I don't think it's going to look bad on a cinema screen. You get the chance to see this. I mean, if you go to victoriawoodmovie.com, you'll see all the places that are showing it. Loads of independent cinemas are backing this, all power to them. It's just the kind of interesting British documentary I think is worth checking out and worth supporting. But also, I think you're getting a really good 90-minute documentary for your money as well. There's a lot of, I mean, some of the photos and things behind the scenes, I mean, I got a lot out of it that I didn't know. And given that the premise of the film is it's going to tell us about how she became the Victoria Wood that we knew, that we saw at least, rather than knew. I think it admirably achieves that. I do recommend it. Victoria Wood, bloody hell, you missed though, aren't you?